Age doesn't always equate to maturity, as some situations painfully remind us. A grown man would never knowingly endanger his child, yet that's exactly what happened when a father's playful prank on a boat cruise took a disastrous turn. What began as harmless fun quickly spiraled into a tragic mistake. Join us as we recount the harrowing events of that day. The warm waters of the Bahamas sparkled under the midday sun, radiating tranquility. For most, it was a perfect day, but for Hudson Blakely, it would be marked by irreversible regret. Hudson and his teenage son Nolan were on a small fishing boat, enjoying their long-awaited vacation. Nolan, awkward yet determined, had been casting his line for hours, unfazed by his lack of success. Hudson, watching from the boat's railing, felt at peace in this idyllic setting, thinking this was the perfect way to bond with his son. In a moment of mischief, Hudson decided to play a prank. Grinning, he gave Nolan a playful shove, sending him splashing into the water. The serene afternoon was shattered as Nolan flailed comically in the water, and Hudson laughed, imagining the memory they'd share later. The waters were warm, and Hudson saw no harm, until something changed. Unknown to them, a school of reef sharks had been cruising nearby, their curiosity piqued by Nolan's splash and thrashing. Though typically docile, the sudden disturbance triggered their predatory instincts. As Hudson waited for his son to swim back to the boat, he noticed something strange. Nolan wasn't playfully swimming. He was moving with a sharp, urgent focus. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Hudson's stomach sank. Dark shadows appeared beneath the surface, circling closer. In an instant, the reality hit him. Sharks. The laughter was gone, replaced by sheer terror, as Hudson realized his harmless prank had turned deadly. Nolan swam frantically, trying to reach the boat, but the sharks closed in, their sleek forms gliding with increasing menace. What had begun as a light-hearted moment had spiraled into a desperate race for survival. Hudson acted on instinct. Without thinking, he threw himself into the water, the cold shock of it jolting his senses. He swam toward Nolan, his heart hammering in his chest. The weight of his mistake crushed down on him, but there was no time to dwell on it. His son was in danger, and he needed to reach him before it was too late. The sharks, sensing the increased commotion, began to circle tighter, their curiosity turning to aggression. Hudson could see them now. Reef sharks, maybe 5 or 6 of them, each around 5 feet long. Though they weren't massive, their numbers and proximity made them dangerous. Their sleek gray bodies moved with terrifying grace, their dorsal fins slicing through the surface like silent predators. Nolan's strokes were growing more frantic, his muscles tiring as adrenaline coursed through him. Hudson swam with all his might, pushing through the water with every ounce of strength he could muster. But the sharks were faster, their sleek forms cutting through the water effortlessly. One of the sharks darted forward, drawn to the vibrations of Nolan's desperate kicks. It wasn't an attack, not yet, but a probe, a test of what lay before it. The shark brushed against Nolan's leg, its rough skin grazing him, and Hudson saw the fear ripple across his son's face. Nolan kicked harder, trying to break free of the sensation, but it was too late. The movement only served to stir the other sharks, their sleek bodies now circling tighter, faster. Hudson reached out, his hand inches from Nolan's arm, but the water felt like it was working against him, slowing him down. He could see the panic in Nolan's eyes, the way his son's body jerked with exhaustion and fear. They were close, so agonizingly close, but the sharks were closer. Another shark darted in, this time more aggressive, its sleek form cutting through the water with deadly precision. It bumped into Nolan's side, not a full bite, but a warning, a prelude to what was to come. The rest of the sharks, encouraged by the movement, began to swarm. Their once cautious circles were now tight and erratic, as if they sensed the moment was near. Hudson reached Nolan just as the first shark's curiosity turned to something darker. The predator lunged, its jaws opening in a flash of white, and Hudson felt the water shift as it bit down. Nolan screamed, a sound that would haunt Hudson for the rest of his life, as the shark's teeth sunk into his leg. Blood blossomed in the water, a dark, terrifying cloud that spread like ink, and the frenzy began. The sharks, once tentative, were now fully engaged. The scent of blood drove them into a feeding frenzy, their sleek bodies darting in and out, their teeth flashing in the murky water. Hudson grabbed Nolan, pulling him toward the boat, but the sharks were relentless. One after another they struck, their bites quick and brutal, each one tearing away at Nolan's body. Hudson's own body screamed in protest as he fought against the water, against the sharks, against the horror of what was happening. He could feel the sharp sting of teeth as one of the sharks brushed past him, but he didn't care. All that mattered was Nolan, getting his son back to the boat, getting him out of the water. But with every second that passed, Hudson knew it was a losing battle. Nolan's movements were slowing, his body limp in Hudson's arms. The water around them was thick with blood, and the sharks were relentless. Hudson kicked and fought, dragging his son toward the boat. But the distance that had once seemed so small now felt insurmountable. By the time Hudson reached the side of the boat, his arms trembling with exhaustion, Nolan was unresponsive. The sharks, having torn into his body with savage efficiency, had left their mark. Hudson heaved his son's limp form onto the deck, collapsing beside him as the adrenaline left his body, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The water, now stained with blood, lapped gently against the boat as if unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded. The sun still shone, the sky still blue, but for Hudson the world had changed irrevocably. He had pushed his son into the water, and now he was gone. A simple prank, a moment of laughter had led to this. A cruel and unforgiving twist of fate that Hudson would carry with him forever. The sharks, no longer interested, drifted away into the depths, leaving behind only the silence of the open sea. The Arctic wind howled across the frigid waters off the coast of Norway, bringing a biting chill that cut through even the thickest layers, as a group of 6 friends gathered early that morning in a small coastal town, eager for a long-awaited whale-watching adventure. Isla Forst, the one whose passion for marine life had sparked the trip, stood at the bow of their modest boat, scanning the water. Her excitement was palpable, her heart racing with anticipation. She had spent years dreaming of seeing orcas up close, and this was her chance. Beside her stood Daniel Cross, her boyfriend, while behind them, their friends, Alec, Finn, Marin, and Eli, laughed and exchanged light-hearted banter, their words swallowed by the vast, cold air. The boat's captain, Stig, steered them through the fjord's narrow waterways with ease, his weathered hands sure on the wheel. For an hour, the group saw nothing but the cold, rippling sea. The thrill of the expedition was beginning to fade when Isla spotted it, a brief glimpse of a dorsal fin slicing through the water. She gestured, her gloved hand pointing to the distance, and the others rushed to the side of the boat, eyes wide with wonder. Soon they spotted the pod, a small group of orcas, their sleek black and white bodies gliding through the water effortlessly. It was everything they had hoped for, the massive creatures moving with grace against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains. The group fell into awed silence as the orcas swam closer, their exhalations sending misty plumes into the cold air. One orca, larger than the rest, separated from the pod and headed toward the boat. Its dorsal fin cut through the water with an eerie precision. Isla's heart pounded as the whale approached, mesmerized by its power and grace. It swam alongside the boat so close she could see its dark eye peering up at them, intelligent and assessing. Then, without warning, the orca submerged and disappeared from view. A tense silence followed. The group exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what had just happened. For a moment, the water was calm, too calm. Suddenly, a massive impact shook the boat. The orca had rammed into it from below, sending everyone lurching to one side. Isla grabbed the railing as the boat tilted dangerously, her face sprayed with freezing seawater. Panic erupted among the friends. The orca had surfaced nearby, its massive body breaking the water's surface once again. This time its demeanor was different. It circled the boat, its fin cutting through the water like a predator stalking its prey. The excitement of the encounter vanished, replaced by fear, as the group realized they were no longer safe. The orca struck the boat again, harder this time. The vessel groaned under the force, wood creaking as the sea churned violently around them. Isla was thrown backward, her body slamming into the side of the boat. She struggled to stay upright, her breath coming in short, frantic bursts. The orca surfaced a short distance away, its powerful body cutting through the waves as it prepared for another attack. The boat rocked violently, water spilling over the sides as the orca circled once more. Isla's heart raced, her mind spinning with the realization that they were helpless against such a massive creature. Another impact shook the boat, this time with such force that the vessel lifted out of the water before crashing back down with a sickening crunch. The wood splintered, and a slow but steady stream of water began to seep into the hull. Isla clung to the railing, her body trembling uncontrollably. The boat was falling apart, and they had no way to fight back. The orca, relentless in its pursuit, circled again, its massive fin slicing through the water like a dark blade. The group scrambled to stay upright, their feet slipping on the slick, icy deck. The orca struck the boat again with devastating force, lifting it out of the water before slamming it down. The sound of cracking wood echoed as water flooded the vessel. Isla's heart raced as she saw the massive creature circling below, its dark form menacing beneath the icy surface. The boat was breaking apart, and the orca wasn't finished. Isla's realization hit like a shock. They were at the mercy of the sea. The final strike tipped the boat entirely on its side, sending her and the others into the freezing water. The cold hit her like needles, stealing her breath as she fought to stay afloat. Around her, the others thrashed in panic, their cries drowned by the roaring waves. The orca swam beneath them, its presence terrifying as it circled. Isla's limbs grew numb as she watched the wreckage sink slowly. Gasping for air, she struggled to keep her head above water. The orca surfaced briefly, then disappeared into the depths, leaving her to fear its next move. Isla's strength ebbed away as the cold overtook her. She slipped beneath the waves, the orca's dark shape the last thing she saw before the sea claimed her. Her body descended into the abyss, her mind fogging as the icy water dragged her into the depths. Above, chaos reigned. Alec, disoriented, gasped for air. Finn, exhausted, struggled to stay afloat. Marin and Eli clung to each other in terror as the boat's remains bobbed uselessly nearby. The orca circled below, an unseen predator waiting for its next move. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Isla had vanished, submerged beneath the waves, while Daniel screamed her name, his voice lost to the wind and waves. His limbs felt like lead as he kicked to stay afloat, each movement slower, more futile. Marin disappeared beneath the surface briefly before Eli yanked her back up, but both were weakening. The freezing water seemed determined to claim them, pulling them under inch by inch. Their movements were sluggish now, their bodies failing. Then the orca struck. Its massive body surged upward, sending a wave crashing into Alec and Finn, separating them. Alec tumbled backward, his body helpless in the water as the orca glided between them. It moved with terrifying speed, a force of nature in the sea's depths. Daniel, closest to the breach, was flung aside by the orca's tail, spinning helplessly as it slammed into the water. The group scattered, their last shreds of energy fading fast. Alec disappeared beneath the surface, exhaustion overtaking him as the sea swallowed him whole. Marin and Eli's grip broke as another wave separated them, sending them spiraling in opposite directions. Marin's hands thrashed weakly before she vanished into the depths, her lungs burning for air. Eli tried in vain to swim toward her, but his body was seizing, no longer responding to his frantic commands. He watched helplessly as Marin disappeared. Finn searched the water for Alec, but the sea had already claimed him. His strength faded, the cold creeping through his bones. The orca breached again, close enough to drown him in its wake. His vision blurred, his muscles failed, and he slipped under, his final breath bubbling away. Daniel, the last to remain, clung to the faint hope of survival. The wreckage of the boat drifted nearby, tauntingly out of reach. His body, too heavy with exhaustion, began to sink. The world above faded as the sea closed over him. The wreckage floated on the surface, the only trace of the group. The sea had claimed them all. The sun blazed over the northern territory, casting harsh reflections on the still waters of the river. The heat shimmered off the cracked mud lining the riverbank, where Jacobus Merlo, a seasoned fisherman, stood with his rod lazily dipping into the water. This was his sanctuary, just him and the wild. The quiet rhythm of fishing soothed him, the slow pull of the line cutting faint ripples into the calm surface. He cast his line once again, the reel whirring in the quiet. Jacobus knew these waters well. They were deceptive, appearing serene but concealing lurking dangers. Over the years, he had learned to respect the wilderness and the creatures that ruled it, particularly the saltwater crocodiles. Though sightings were rare, the knowledge of their presence was ever in his mind. Unbeknownst to Jacobus, a massive crocodile had been watching him for hours, its eyes barely visible above the waterline. The ancient predator, over 17 feet long, lay motionless, waiting. Each passing minute brought the crocodile closer to its target, concealed by the murky depths. Oblivious to the lurking danger, Jacobus felt resistance on his line. It had snagged, likely on a rock or submerged branch. With a few unsuccessful tugs, he knew he would have to wade in to free it. Leaving his gear on the shore, he cautiously stepped into the water. The heat of the day gave way to the coolness around his legs as he waded more profoundly, the water rising to his knees. As Jacobus moved forward, the crocodile closed the gap undetected beneath the water's surface. Its immense body, as heavy as a car, glided effortlessly, a silent predator preparing for its moment. Reaching for the line, Jacobus strained to see what had caught it. His focus on the task dulled the unease gnawing at the back of his mind, a wilderness instinct he had honed over years of fishing. He straightened, scanning the stillness around him. Everything seemed too calm, but his eyes caught no sign of danger. He sighed and returned to his task, unaware that the crocodile was poised to strike. Without warning, the water erupted in a violent surge. A blur of motion, then searing pain, shot through Jacobus's leg. The crocodile's jaws had clamped onto his thigh with brutal force, its teeth sinking deep into flesh and bone. His breath caught in a silent scream as the beast began its death roll, twisting violently and dragging him toward deeper water. Jacobus flailed desperately, his hands grasping for anything to hold on to, but there was nothing but water and mud. His fishing rod sank into the river, forgotten. The crocodile thrashed, its powerful tail churning the water, sending waves crashing over him as it pulled him deeper, its immense strength overwhelming. In that chaotic moment, the wilderness reclaimed its place at the top of the food chain. The pain was unbearable. It radiated from his leg, a white-hot agony that clouded his mind. But Jacobus knew what was happening. He had heard stories and seen the aftermath of crocodile attacks. He knew that if he let himself be dragged into the deeper water, it would be over. The crocodile would perform its death roll, drowning him while tearing him apart. He kicked with his free leg, desperately trying to wrench himself free, but the crocodile's grip was unyielding. Each movement only seemed to make the creature tighten its hold, its jagged teeth cutting deeper into his flesh. Blood mixed with the water, turning the shallows red. Jacobus grabbed at his leg, trying to push the crocodile's jaws open, but it was like trying to pry apart a steel trap. He knew he couldn't outmuscle the beast, so he tried to twist his body to the side, hoping to angle himself toward the shore. If he could reach solid ground, maybe, just maybe, he could break free. The crocodile, sensing the resistance, thrashed harder, dragging Jacobus further into the water. His head dipped beneath the surface, the world around him muffled as the muddy water closed over him. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let himself go under. With a violent jerk, he forced his head back above the water, gasping for air. The crocodile paused for a moment, adjusting its grip, and Jacobus seized the opportunity. With a burst of energy, he swung his left arm toward the shore, fingers digging into the mud as he tried to pull himself closer. His hand found a root, thick and gnarled, jutting out from the riverbank. He wrapped his fingers around it, gripping tightly as the crocodile pulled again, its weight threatening to tear him free. The struggle was relentless. The crocodile thrashed, its immense power sending shock waves through the water, but Jacobus held on with everything he had. The root creaked under the strain, but it held firm. For a brief moment, he felt a sliver of hope. If he could hold on a little longer, maybe the crocodile would let go. But the crocodile wasn't finished. It surged forward, dragging Jacobus deeper once more, its jaws grinding against bone. The pain was overwhelming, a constant, gnawing presence that threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. He knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. His muscles were burning, his grip weakening. Suddenly, the crocodile shifted its grip, its jaws releasing his leg for a split second before clamping down again, this time higher up on his body, around his hip. The force knocked the breath from his lungs, and Jacobus felt himself being lifted off the riverbed, his body flailing helplessly as the crocodile twisted in the water. He had no more leverage, no more strength to fight. With a final desperate pull, the crocodile yanked him away from the root, and Jacobus was dragged fully into the water. The world above disappeared as he was submerged, the murky depths closing in around him. His limbs thrashed uselessly as the crocodile began its death roll, spinning violently with him locked in its jaws. Water filled his lungs as he was rolled and tossed beneath the surface, the predator's strength unmatched. Jacobus knew this was the end. The fight drained from him as darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. His body went limp in the crocodile's grip, his mind drifting away as the last of his air escaped in a trail of bubbles. The water stilled once more, the surface calm and undisturbed. The crocodile, victorious, dragged its lifeless prey into the deeper waters of the Northern Territory, disappearing beneath the surface where the river concealed all it had claimed. And just like that, the quiet returned to the shore. As the Florida Keys glimmered under the blazing sun, Evan Harrell floated on his back, completely immersed in the serenity. Evan had always been fascinated by the marine world. Today he was enjoying a leisurely swim, his body barely disturbing the water as he glided effortlessly. His wrist sparkled with a new flashy bracelet, a recent birthday gift that glinted invitingly in the sunlight. Unbeknownst to him, this piece of jewelry had caught the eye of a far more dangerous inhabitant of the reef. Lurking in the deeper shadowed waters was a sleek silver barracuda. Its elongated body and sharp-pointed teeth made it one of the ocean's most efficient predators. The barracuda's keen eyes locked onto the glint of Evan's bracelet. This glimmer was a siren call, drawing the predator from the shadows. The barracuda, with its signature swiftness, moved with a purpose. It approached with stealth, its streamlined form cutting through the water with minimal resistance. The vibrant colors and movements of the small fish around Evan did nothing to alert him to the imminent danger. He continued to float, oblivious to the predator's approach. Suddenly, the barracuda surged forward, its powerful tail propelling it at incredible speed. The moment of attack was swift and brutal. With a flash of silver and a rush of water, the barracuda's jaws clamped down on Evan's arm. The force of the bite was like a vice, and the sharp pain was immediate and excruciating. Blood clouded the water, turning the once clear expanse into a red-tinted haze. Evan's first instinct was to jerk away, but the barracuda's grip was unyielding. The swimmer thrashed in the water, his arm pinned in the predator's jaws. He tried to swim, to get away, but every movement was met with the sharp bite of the barracuda's teeth. The pain was unbearable, and panic began to set in as the swimmer's struggles only seemed to provoke the barracuda further. The barracuda's relentless assault continued. It released and then struck again, its teeth tearing through flesh with brutal efficiency. Evan's arm was a mess of blood and torn skin, and the predator's aggression showed no sign of waning. The swimmer's attempts to escape became increasingly frantic, his movements growing more erratic as the pain intensified and his strength waned. As the attack persisted, the tide began to pull Evan away from the safety of the shore. The current worked against him, dragging him farther into the open water. The barracuda's assault seemed to be relentless, each bite exacerbating Evan's distress and blood loss. He was losing precious strength and control, his struggle becoming more desperate. Fortunately, the sound of the commotion had not gone unnoticed. A nearby boat crew, enjoying a break from their water activities, spotted the chaotic splashes and red-streaked water. Their immediate response was critical. With urgent haste, they maneuvered their boat closer to Evan, who was now drifting further from the shore, weakening rapidly. One of the crew members, armed with a life-saving instinct and a makeshift rescue line, dove into the water. Despite the inherent dangers, the rescuer swam toward Evan, navigating through the bloodied water. Each stroke was a battle against the current and the potential threat of the barracuda. The predator, now distracted by the movement and the blood in the water, seemed to lose focus momentarily. The rescuer reached Evan, gripping his uninjured arm and pulling him toward the boat. With considerable effort, the crew member managed to drag both Evan and himself out of the immediate danger zone. The barracuda, sensing the shifting dynamics, eventually retreated into the depths from which it came. Back on the boat, the crew worked swiftly to stabilize Evan, applying pressure to his wounds and administering first aid as best they could. The urgency of their actions was apparent. Time was of the essence. Evan was in critical condition, his blood loss severe and his pain excruciating. As the boat made its way back to the shore, the crew remained vigilant, their focus solely on getting Evan to the nearest medical facility. As the boat approached the shore, the medical personnel awaited with bated breath. They took over from the boat crew, transferring Evan to an ambulance. The swimmer's future was uncertain, but the swift actions of those who came to his aid provided him with a fighting chance. In the aftermath of the attack, the Keys returned to their serene beauty, the waters once again calm and inviting. But for Evan, the vibrant marine life would forever be tinged with the memory of a silent killer that lurked just out of sight. Beneath the surface of the Japanese coast lies a rich underwater forest, swayed in rhythm with the currents, teeming with vibrant marine life. Schools of fish darted in and out of the towering kelp, their scales catching the light in flashes of silver. It was a hidden world, one untouched by the chaos of the surface. And for Anders Meyer, it was the reason he had traveled halfway around the globe. Anders had always felt more at home in the water than on land. A seasoned diver, he had explored countless underwater realms, but none as unique as the kelp forests near Japan's Pacific coast. He swam gracefully through the dense kelp, each movement calculated, his breathing controlled. The water was clear, offering perfect visibility of the flourishing marine life around him. Giant stingrays glided by like ghosts in the water, while octopuses curled themselves around rocks, hiding from the open waters. Anders's partner, Cedric, swam not far behind, a silent companion in this watery world. They had dived together for years, each trusting the other's instincts and skill, especially in the unpredictable depths of the ocean. As Anders maneuvered through the kelp, he felt a shift in the current and slowed his movements, his eyes scanning the underwater forest for the source of the change. His hand brushed against a thick, fibrous stalk of kelp, and as he turned to follow a school of fish darting by, he unknowingly brushed against something far more dangerous. At first, it was just a faint prickling sensation on his skin, almost like the sting of a nettle. But the reaction was immediate and violent. A wave of searing pain shot through his arm, traveling like wildfire from his fingertips to his shoulder. Anders instinctively recoiled, his body jolting as though an electric current had struck him. His breathing quickened as his mind tried to process what had just happened. He looked down at his arm, but there was no visible wound, nothing to suggest the intense pain coursing through his veins. Panic began to claw at the edges of his mind. Then he saw it, the near-invisible strands of a giant Nomura's jellyfish drifting in the water, its massive, pulsating bell blending seamlessly into the kelp forest. The jellyfish's long, venomous tentacles swirled gently in the water, almost invisible in the light filtering through the seaweed. Anders' heart pounded in his chest as he realized the severity of the situation. Nomura's jellyfish were among the largest in the world, their tentacles capable of delivering a venomous sting that could hinder a person within minutes, and he had just brushed against its tendrils. The venom worked quickly, spreading paralysis through his body, and already he could feel his muscles beginning to seize. His arms, once solid and responsive, now felt heavy and numb. He tried to signal to Cedric, but his movements were sluggish and uncoordinated. His vision began to blur around the edges as the venom attacked his nervous system, dulling his senses. The pain was sharp at first, but soon gave way to an overwhelming numbness that spread through his limbs. He kicked his legs, desperate to move, but they too were losing strength. Panic gripped him as he felt himself begin to sink, his once graceful strokes now floundering, ineffective. He was trapped, suspended in the water, unable to move, his limbs no longer obeying his commands. The jellyfish loomed nearby, a silent predator in the depths, unaware of the damage it had already inflicted. Time seemed to slow as Anders fought against the inevitable. His lungs burned as he tried to maintain steady breathing, but the paralysis was creeping upward, tightening around his chest, constricting his ability to expand his lungs fully. His mind screamed at him to move, to swim, to fight, but his body was betraying him, succumbing to the venom with terrifying speed. Cedric, realizing something was wrong, swam toward him with urgency. From a distance, it was clear that Anders was no longer in control of his movements. His body had gone limp, his arms and legs barely moving as the current began to drag him deeper. Cedric's heart pounded as he reached Anders, grabbing hold of his arm. but he felt no response. Anders's eyes were wide with fear, but his body was unresponsive, dead weight in the water. The situation was dire. Cedric knew that the venom of a Nomura's jellyfish could cause paralysis and, if untreated, lead to respiratory failure. With Anders sinking fast, Cedric wrapped his arm around his partner's chest and began to pull him upward, his legs kicking furiously against the water. The weight of Anders's limp body made it difficult to ascend. The surface seemed impossibly far away. The deeper they were, the more pressure worked against them, and the weight of Anders's unresponsive body added to the challenge. Cedric's muscles burned with effort as he fought against the pull of the water. His lungs screamed for air, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The venom was working its way through Anders' system, and soon he would be unable to breathe on his own. Cedric's heart raced as he kicked harder, his arms straining to keep Anders afloat. The surface, once distant, now began to grow closer, the sunlight shimmering through the water like a beacon of hope. But time was slipping away. He could feel the drag of the jellyfish's evil grip on his partner, could see the way Anders' chest struggled to rise and fall, his breaths growing shallower with each passing second. With a final burst of energy, Cedric broke through the surface, gasping for air as he pulled Anders up alongside him. The waves rocked them, and Cedric struggled to keep them both afloat. Anders's body was limp, his face pale, his breathing labored. The venom had done its damage, but there was still time, barely. Cedric inflated Anders' buoyancy vest and began the slow, arduous swim toward their boat, which bobbed in the distance. The currents, once a gentle companion, now seemed to fight against him, every stroke a battle. His mind raced, calculating the time they had left before the venom paralyzed Anders completely. He kicked harder, refusing to give in to the exhaustion that was creeping into his limbs. By the time they reached the boat, Cedric was nearly spent, his arms trembling with fatigue. He heaved Anders over the side of the ship, collapsing beside him. The venom had taken its toll. Anders's breathing was shallow, his body barely responsive. But he was alive. They had been lucky, but the ocean had its own rules and its dangers. And in the waters of Japan, even the most experienced diver could fall prey to the unseen perils lurking in the depths. The sun hung high over the Mediterranean, casting a golden sheen across the crystalline waters that lapped against the rugged rocky coast of the Calabrian Peninsula. It was the perfect day for snorkeling. The waves rolled gently and the sea was clear, revealing a vibrant tapestry of marine life. Above the undulating surface, Francesca Moretti and her partner Daniel Hart floated, their snorkel masks glinting in the sunlight. Francesca and Daniel had come to Italy for a romantic getaway, seeking both adventure and relaxation. Today they had chosen to explore the underwater world that lay just beneath the surface. Equipped with snorkels and fins, they ventured out from a small cove where the land met the sea in a dramatic display of rugged cliffs and hidden crevices. As they descended, the light from above fractured into a kaleidoscope of colors, illuminating the vibrant coral reefs and schools of fish that darted through the water. Francesca's eyes widened as she admired a cluster of rainbow-hued anemones and the graceful dance of a sea turtle gliding by. Daniel, equally entranced, pointed to a pair of seahorses entwined amongst the seagrass. The couple moved in unison, their movements synchronizing as they floated effortlessly through the underwater paradise. As they drifted further from the cove, the terrain beneath them began to change. The sandy seabed gave way to rocky outcrops and crevices, forming a more rugged and shadowed landscape. The excitement of discovery kept them focused on the beauty around them. Neither noticed the dark opening of an underwater cave nestled among the rocks until they were nearly upon it. The cave was not particularly large, but shadows and the jagged edges of the surrounding rocks obscured its entrance. Francesca, always curious, pointed toward it with enthusiasm, her movements stirring up a cloud of sand and silt. Daniel, initially cautious, followed her lead, his curiosity piqued by the mystery of the darkened crevice. They hovered near the entrance, the cool, dark water a stark contrast to the sunlit expanse outside. Unbeknownst to them, the cave was home to a giant moray eel, its sleek body coiled in a menacing posture. The eel, a predator of the Mediterranean depths, had chosen this cave as its lair. It had remained hidden, its keen eyes watching as the couple approached, its patience a deadly virtue. Daniel, too close to the cave's entrance, drew nearer, his fins brushing against the rocky walls. The eel, sensing the proximity of a potential meal, tensed. With a swift and sudden motion, it lunged from its lair, its powerful jaws opening wide. The eel's sharp teeth, hidden behind a seemingly innocent facade, clamped onto Daniel's exposed arm with a vice-like grip. The sensation of the eel's bite was immediate and excruciating. Daniel's eyes widened in shock, his body reacting instinctively to the intense pain. He thrashed violently, his arms flailing as he tried to dislodge the eel. Francesca, alarmed by the sudden commotion, turned to see her partner's desperate struggle. Her heart pounded in her chest as she witnessed the eel's serpentine body coiling around Daniel's arm, its teeth embedded firmly into his flesh. Francesca's first instinct was to reach out and help. She grabbed at the eel, her hands grasping its slick, scaly body in a frantic attempt to pull it away. The eel's movements were fluid and quick, and despite Francesca's desperate efforts, it retreated deeper into the cave, dragging Daniel along with it. The underwater struggle intensified, the narrow confines of the cave amplifying the sense of entrapment. Daniel's movements became increasingly erratic as he fought against the eel's relentless grip. His arm throbbed with pain, each movement only seeming to provoke the eel further. Francesca, her heart racing, tried to free Daniel by pulling at the eel from the outside. Her efforts were met with limited success as the eel, sensing its vulnerability, burrowed further into the darkness of the cave, its body twisting and turning to maintain its hold. The struggle grew more desperate as the minutes ticked by. Francesca, her face contorted with fear and determination, could barely see through the murky water and the growing cloud of sand. The cave's entrance was narrow, limiting her ability to maneuver and provide practical assistance. Daniel's thrashing became more frantic, his movements growing weaker as he struggled against the powerful jaws of the eel. Francesca's mind raced with potential solutions, but the constraints of their situation offered few options. The cave's depth and the eel's tenacity made it clear that any attempt to pry the predator away would be fraught with peril. Francesca's hands slipped off the eel's slick body repeatedly, her fingers failing to gain a secure grip. The eel's retreating movements pulled Daniel further into the cave, and Francesca could see the shadows deepening around them as the predator maneuvered for a more secure position. The water around them became increasingly turbulent as Francesca's movements grew more frantic. She realized that any hope of freeing Daniel would require more than just brute strength. It would demand precision and timing. Summoning all her remaining strength, Francesca braced herself against the rocky entrance of the cave and pushed with all her might. Daniel's thrashing slowed, his energy sapped by the relentless struggle. Francesca, desperate, clung to the cave's entrance and reached further into the darkness. Her fingers brushed against the eel's body, feeling the cold, slimy texture of its scales. With a final, determined effort, she grasped the eel's head and pulled with all her might, trying to force it away from Daniel's arm. The eel, feeling the pressure and sensing an imminent threat, began to retreat further into the cave, its grip on Daniel weakening slightly. Francesca seized the opportunity, pulling harder, her movements synchronized with the eel's retreat. With a final desperate heave, she managed to pry the eel's jaws open, freeing Daniel's arm from its grip. Exhausted and disoriented, Daniel floated in the water, his face pale and eyes wide with shock. Francesca, her heart still racing, looked at him with a mix of relief and fear. The cave loomed ominously behind them, the predator's lair a dark and menacing reminder of the danger they had just escaped. With careful, controlled movements, Francesca guided Daniel back towards the open water, their path illuminated by the fading sun. The intense struggle had taken its toll on both of them, but the sense of relief at having escaped the predator's grasp was palpable.